The bread you watched come out of the oven this morning was probably baked twice, in two different places, months apart. Most supermarket in-store bakeries do not make bread. They finish it. The dough is mixed, shaped, and partially baked in a large industrial plant, frozen solid, shipped, and stored in a freezer at the back of the shop. Somebody wheels a rack into an oven, gives it 15 minutes, and the smell that reaches you at the front of the store is real. The baking, mostly, already happened. None of that is illegal, and none of it is hidden. It is simply that the phrase "freshly baked" describes an event that took place this morning, and says nothing at all about when the bread was actually made. 8 things about the bakery section worth understanding, and 3 that genuinely hold up. Number 1 is permitted in American bread and banned in several other countries. The usual note: this comes from federal labeling rules, standards of identity, additive regulations, and public dietary data. Bread is not dangerous, and none of this is an argument against eating it. I am describing what the words on the packaging are allowed to mean. Start with why this section is different to the rest of the shop. Almost everything else you buy arrives sealed, labeled, and finished. The bakery is the one department built to look like a workshop. Open racks, paper bags, tongs, a glass case, a person in an apron. That staging is doing an enormous amount of work, because it converts an industrial product into something that feels handmade, and it does it without a single false statement being printed anywhere. The second difference is the labeling itself. A packaged loaf on the bread aisle carries a full ingredient list, a nutrition panel, and allergen declarations. An item baked and sold loose at the counter frequently carries far less. Unpackaged bakery foods are treated differently under nutrition labeling rules, and while allergen information is generally available if you ask, it is often not printed on the bag you carry out. So the same croissant can tell you everything or almost nothing, depending on which side of the aisle you pick it up from. Number 8. The word fresh. There is no federal standard defining freshly baked for bread. The regulatory idea of fresh mostly concerns raw foods that have not been frozen or processed, and it was never written with a bakery rack in mind. A par-baked frozen loaf finished in store this morning can be described as freshly baked, and it is accurate, because it was. What you are actually paying a premium for is the last 15 minutes of a process that began in a factory. The bread may be perfectly good. But if freshness is why you chose the bakery over the bread aisle, it is worth knowing that the difference between the two is often just where the final bake happened. Number 7. Wheat bread. All bread is wheat bread. Wheat is what bread is made of. On a label, the word wheat by itself means refined white flour, and a brown loaf sold as wheat bread very commonly gets its color from caramel coloring or molasses rather than from the grain. The phrase that carries meaning is 100% whole wheat, or whole grain, listed as the first ingredient. Whole means the bran and germ are still in there, which is where the fiber and most of the micronutrients live. Refined flour has both removed, then a short list of vitamins added back by law, which is what enriched means on a bag of flour. Enriched is not a compliment, it is a repair. Number 6. Multigrain and artisan. Multigrain means more than one grain. That is the entire requirement. It does not mean whole grain, it does not mean high fiber, and a multigrain loaf can be white flour with 3 other refined grains and a scatter of seeds pressed into the crust. Artisan means even less, because it means nothing at all. It is not defined by any regulation, so it can describe a loaf shaped by hand over 18 hours, or a frozen puck finished in a rack oven. Rustic, country-style, hearth-baked, stone-baked and old-fashioned sit in the same category. They are the vocabulary of a bakery, applied to a product that may have no relationship to one. Number 5. The seeded crust and the dark color. Color is the fastest signal a loaf can send, and it is also the easiest to add. Caramel coloring is a legal ingredient, and it is genuinely useful, but a dark rye or pumpernickel gets much of its depth from it rather than from rye content, and rye bread in the United States has no minimum rye requirement at all. A loaf can be mostly wheat flour and still be sold as rye. Seeds on the outside are decoration. Seeds through the crumb are an ingredient. The two look similar from a distance and cost the shop very different amounts, which is exactly why the crust is where they end up. Number 4. Best before dates. The date printed on a loaf is a quality estimate set by the manufacturer, not a safety instruction, and outside infant formula, the federal system does not regulate these dates at all. Best before means the bakery's judgment about when it stops being at its best. It is not the day it becomes unsafe. Bread mostly tells you the truth by looking at it. Mold is visible and means throw it out, including the rest of the loaf, because what you can see is not the whole of what is there. But a day past the date, with no mold and no off smell, is simply older bread. The date is a stalking tool that has been widely misread as a deadline, and bread is one of the most commonly wasted foods in the home. Number 3. The salt. This is the item nobody expects. Bread is not a salty food in the way crisps are, but it is eaten in such quantity, so consistently, that it is one of the largest single contributors of sodium to the average diet, regularly appearing near the top of public health lists of sodium sources, above many foods that taste far saltier. That is not the bakery being reckless. Salt controls fermentation, strengthens gluten, and is genuinely structural in bread. But 2 slices at breakfast and 2 at lunch is a meaningful sodium load arriving from a food most people never count. If you are watching sodium and cannot work out where yours is coming from, this is usually the answer, and the numbers vary widely between loaves, which is the useful part. Number 2. Sourdough that was never soured. Sourdough has no standard of identity in the United States. The word describes a method, flour and water fermented by wild yeast and bacteria over many hours, which is what develops the acidity, the flavor, and the structure. But nothing legally requires a loaf labeled sourdough to have been made that way. A commercial loaf can be produced with ordinary baker's yeast on a fast schedule and given its tang by adding acid directly, or by using a dried sourdough flavoring. The result looks right, tastes approximately right, and takes a fraction of the time. The tells are the ingredient list, added vinegar, lactic acid, or yeast alongside the culture, and the price, because real fermentation costs hours that a factory schedule does not have. Number 1. What is allowed in the dough? 2 dough conditioners make this the one item on the list with a genuine regulatory gap. Potassium bromate strengthens dough and improves rise, and it is permitted in bread in the United States. It has been banned or withdrawn in the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Brazil and elsewhere, and in California a state law now restricts it. Azodicarbonamide, a bleaching and conditioning agent, is similarly permitted federally and not allowed in the European Union. Most large American bakers stopped using bromate voluntarily years ago, and where it is usually consumed in the baking. This is not a reason for alarm about a sandwich. But it is a straightforward case where the same product, sold by the same companies, is made to a different standard depending on which country it is sold in. And the only way to know which version you are holding is to read the ingredient list, where both must be declared. 3 that hold up. Bread from a bakery that actually mixes and ferments on site is worth the money, and it is easy to identify. It goes stale in 2 days instead of 10. That is not a flaw. Stalling that fast means there is nothing in it engineered to prevent it, and a loaf with a short life is telling you something honest about how it was made. 100% whole grain, with the grain first on the ingredient list, does what people think brown bread does. Fiber, more micronutrients, slower digestion. The label test takes 4 seconds, and it is the single most useful habit in this section. And the freezer. Bread stales fastest at refrigerator temperature. The fridge is the worst place you can put it, while freezing halts it almost entirely. Slice the loaf, freeze it in a bag, toast from frozen. A good loaf you eat over 3 weeks costs less per slice than a cheap one you throw half of away. The pattern across all 8 is the same. There is very little deception in the bakery and a great deal of theater. The oven smell is real, the rack is real, the apron is real, and none of them are claims about the bread. Read the ingredient list, buy the loaf that goes stale, and freeze what you cannot eat.